The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the kind that came when a ship powered down for routine maintenance or the soft hum of electronics in standby mode. This was different. A void, a pressing, suffocating stillness that made every breath feel like an intrusion. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched. I tightened my grip on the pulse rifle slung across my chest and took a slow step forward. My boots barely made a sound against the metal floor of the control deck, but the moment stretched long, unnatural. The emergency lights flickered, bathing the room in deep crimson. Every control panel was frozen, systems unresponsive. That shouldn't have been possible. Then the AI's voice crackled through the speakers, glitchy, distorted. Unauthorized presence detected. Lifeform classification, unknown. I froze. A deep, instinctual chill crawled up my spine. The Eclipse 7 was a reconnaissance vessel built with the most advanced cloaking and security technology available to human civilization. I was alone on this ship. At least I had been. The AI didn't make mistakes. If it said something was here, then something was here. I turned slowly, pulse racing, scanning the control deck. The space was empty, but shadows shifted strangely, in the corners where the red emergency lighting didn't quite reach. My heartbeat hammered in my ears as I took another step. The AI's voice came again, more urgent this time. Proximity alert. Lifeform detected, 7 meters. 7 meters. That was right behind me. I spun, pulse rifle raised, finger tensed against the trigger. At first I saw nothing, just the empty metal bulkhead, the flickering emergency lights casting erratic patterns across the walls. But then, movement. A subtle shimmer in the air like heat distortion. My breath hitched as the distortion solidified, resolving into a figure standing near the airlock. I had expected something monstrous, a nightmare with too many limbs, razor-sharp mandibles, something grotesque from the deep void. I hadn't expected her. She stood there trembling, her breath uneven. At first glance she looked human, almost. She was tall, slender. Her form wrapped in a bodysuit that shimmered like liquid metal. Her skin was a pale iridescent blue, reflecting the emergency lights in strange shifting hues. But what truly stopped me were her eyes, deep violet, luminescent, almost too human. Yet, wrong. She raised her hand slowly, a universal gesture of surrender, though something in the way she did it felt unnatural, as if mimicking a movement she had only ever observed from a distance. Then she spoke. "Please, human. Don't look at me like that." Her voice was soft, but there was a weight to it, a sadness that I couldn't quite place. I kept my rifle trained on her, swallowing hard. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. A breach in my ship was impossible. The Eclipse 7 was designed to be impenetrable, and yet here she was. "How did you get on board?" I demanded. She hesitated, her fingers twitching at her sides as if she was resisting the urge to reach for something. "A weapon? A device? Your ship isn't as secure as you believe," she said finally. "Not against what's coming." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean, what's coming?" Before she could answer, the ship lurched violently. A deep groaning sound echoed through the hull, metal straining as if under immense pressure. The emergency lights flared, and the AI's voice came again, this time laced with panic. "Warning. Gravitational anomaly detected. External reality distortion increasing. Evacuation advised." That made my blood run cold. Reality distortions were rare, phenomena that twisted space itself, sometimes swallowing entire fleets without a trace. They were thought to be remnants of ancient, forgotten wars between species far more advanced than humanity. I took an involuntary step back. "What the hell did you do?" "It's not me," she whispered. "It's them." The ship shuddered again. A deep vibration resonated through the walls, a sound I had only ever heard once before, when a rift had opened near the Omega Nebula, swallowing an entire colony. It had taken a full fleet of warships to stabilize space afterward. Outside the viewport, the darkness of space twisted unnaturally. Stars bent and stretched, warping like reflections on disturbed water. A rift was forming. Something was coming through. I turned back to the woman, if that's what she even was. Tell me what's happening. Her violet eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw fear there. They followed me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They can't be allowed to breach this ship. Another violent tremor threw me against the control panel. Sparks flew as circuits overloaded, warning sirens shrieking. I scrambled back to my feet, breathing hard. The AI's voice rang out again. Hostile presence detected. Incoming contact. Unknown classification. I had seen what happened when ships were caught in the wake of a rift. I had seen the aftermath. Shattered vessels. Crews torn apart by forces they couldn't comprehend. I had no intention of letting that happen to me. I turned to the woman, leveling my rifle at her once more. You have one chance. Tell me how to stop this. She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the base of her throat. Her form flickered. A shimmer ran over her skin, distorting her features, revealing something else beneath. I watched in stunned silence as her appearance shifted. Her limbs elongating slightly, her body taking on a more fluid, almost biomechanical form. Her face changed too, morphing between different variations, some human, some not, before finally settling on something in between. I can stop it, she said, but you won't like what comes next. I tightened my grip on the rifle. Try me. Outside, the rift began to open. The shadows beyond it started to move. We were out of time. I didn't lower the rifle, but I didn't fire either. My hands were steady, but my mind was anything but. The ship groaned under the pressure of whatever was happening outside, and alarms blared relentlessly. Every instinct told me that I should subdue her, detain her, get control of the situation. But something deeper, something more primal, warned me not to. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of them. And that terrified me more than anything. You need me if you want to live, she said. Her voice was softer this time, less of a plea, more of a statement. My jaw clenched. I hated this. Hated the lack of control. Hated that she had somehow gotten onto my ship without setting off every alarm in the system. And yet I couldn't ignore the fact that she knew something I didn't. Another shudder racked the Eclipse 7. This one was worse. I felt the artificial gravity glitch for a moment, my stomach lurching as the ship's stabilizers struggled against whatever was happening outside. I had seconds to decide. What are they? I asked. Her violet eyes flicked toward the viewport. I followed her gaze, and my stomach twisted. The rift had widened. It wasn't just a crack in space. It was alive, shifting, pulsing with a deep, unnatural energy. Dark tendrils of something I couldn't comprehend coiled and unfurled beyond it, and within its depths, I caught glimpses of something worse. Shapes moved in the darkness, too many to count. A fleet? No. Fleets had form, structure. This was something else. Something wrong. They are the Voidborn, she said quietly. They consume. That single word made my blood run cold. I had heard the rumors. Ships vanishing in deep space. Entire colonies lost without a trace. Some believed it was piracy, others some new weapon of an unknown race. But in the dark corners of classified reports and the whispers of those who had seen too much, there had been another name, the Voidborn, a force that didn't conquer, a force that didn't negotiate, a force that simply erased. I turned back to her, heart hammering. How do we stop them? For the first time she hesitated. A flicker of something unreadable passed across her face. You won't like the answer. The ship shuddered again. This time I heard something new. A sound, except it wasn't a sound. It was deeper, felt rather than heard, like something pressing against the edges of my mind. I gritted my teeth. Try me. She exhaled sharply, as if making peace with something, then stepped closer. I can shield us for now, she said, but I need access to your mind. That stopped me cold. I stiffened, barely resisting the urge to step back. Excuse me? They hunt by perception, she continued quickly. The moment they see you, truly see you, you're marked. They lock onto your existence, and there's no escaping them. I swallowed hard. And you can stop that? She nodded. For a time. But I need to merge with your consciousness, your thoughts, your memories, yourself. Everything in me screamed against the idea. Let an unknown entity into my mind? That was a step beyond trust. That was handing over the last piece of myself that was truly mine. No. The word was out before I could stop it. She tensed, and for a moment I thought she might argue. Instead, she simply closed her eyes. I understand, she said quietly. Then she stepped past me and placed her hand against the ship's control panel. Instantly, the entire room pulsed with a deep, violet glow. I jerked back, rifle raised. What the hell are you doing? Saving your life. The ship responded to her. Not like it responded to a human pilot with simple inputs and commands, but something more. The control panel rippled under her touch like liquid metal, and the glow spread outward, threading through the ship's circuits like veins. Outside, the Voidborn shifted. Their tendrils of darkness recoiled slightly, as if sensing the change. But they didn't leave. She turned back to me, her eyes glowing, brighter than before. It's not enough, she said, her voice strained. I can mask us, but they're searching. They're learning. I realized then that her hands were shaking. Whatever she was doing, it was taking a toll on her, and it wasn't going to last. I clenched my jaw, fighting against every survival instinct that told me I was making a mistake. Then with a slow, measured breath, I lowered my rifle. What happens if we merge? I asked. She looked at me surprised. You'll see what I see, she said. Feel what I feel. There will be no secrets between us. That sounded like a nightmare. But the alternative was worse. I let out a slow breath. Do it. She hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. This close, I could see the faint patterns on her skin, shifting lines of silver and blue like circuitry woven into her very being. She reached up and pressed her fingertips to my temple. The world shattered. A flood of memories, not mine, rushed into my head. A civilization unlike any I had ever known. Towers of liquid light stretching into a violet sky. Creatures that pulsed with energy, not flesh, moving in perfect harmony. And then, destruction. Darkness descending. Cities collapsing into nothingness. Beings screaming without sound as they were unmade. I staggered, gasping, barely aware that I had fallen to my knees. Vela knelt beside me, her hand still pressed against my temple. This is what they do, she whispered. This is what's coming for your kind. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus. My mind ached, raw from the sudden connection. But through the pain, I felt something else. Her fear. She wasn't just running from them, she was running from something worse. I forced myself to meet her gaze. You're not telling me everything. Her expression wavered. Then the ship trembled violently. The Voidborn had found us. The moment Vela's fingers pressed against my temple, my world shattered. A flood of foreign memories crashed into my mind too much, too fast. I gasped as a kaleidoscope of images, sensations, and emotions surged through me. It was as if my own consciousness had been cracked open, leaving me exposed to something vast and incomprehensible. I saw things I could never have imagined. Towers of liquid light stretching into a violet sky. A world that pulsed with energy. Not steel and stone, but something alive. Something woven into the very fabric of existence. Beings that shimmered like translucent ghosts, moving in harmony with one another, connected not by speech but by thought itself. And then, destruction. Darkness. Descended. A force unlike anything I had ever encountered, a hunger that devoured not just life but the idea of life itself. I felt entire cities wink out of existence as if they had never been. I felt minds, billions of them, vanish, not die, but simply cease to be. The Voidborn. They didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They erased. And suddenly, I knew. I knew why she had come here. I knew why she had broken into my ship. Why she had been so desperate. She wasn't just running from them. She was running from herself. I tore away from her touch with a ragged gasp, collapsing onto my hands and knees. My body trembled violently, my mind struggling to process the raw flood of knowledge that wasn't mine. My heart pounded like a war drum, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gulps. I was still me, but I wasn't only me anymore. Vela staggered, back as well, clutching her head as if the connection had drained her too. You saw it, she whispered. I pushed myself up, my hand still shaking. Yeah, I saw it. My voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp. And I saw something else too, a secret buried deep within her memories, something she hadn't meant for me to find. The Voidborn were hunting her. That much was true, but they weren't just following her blindly. She had led them here. My pulse spiked. I reached for my rifle before I even realized what I was doing. Vela's glowing violet eyes widened as she saw the movement. No, she said quickly, stepping back. You don't understand. I rose to my feet, rifle aimed at her chest. My mind still reeled, my vision swimming, but I forced myself to focus. You knew they would come here, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You knew the risk. She didn't deny it. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She hesitated, just long enough for me to see the truth on her face. I shook my head, something cold and bitter twisting in my gut. You used me. She took a step forward, hands raised, her expression pleading. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I snapped. Another tremor rocked the ship, this one worse than before. The lights flickered violently, the emergency sirens blaring at full volume. The AI's voice cut through the chaos, urgent and clipped. Warning. Rift destabilization imminent. Hostile entities breaching dimensional barrier. Evacuation strongly advised. I had seconds, maybe less. My grip tightened on the trigger. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't end this right now. Vela didn't move, she just stared at me, her glowing eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Then slowly, she lowered her hands. If you kill me, she said, you'll die too. I didn't lower the rifle. Try me. She exhaled, shaking her head. The merge, our connection, it's not just surface level. I left something in you, and you left something in me. I felt it, a strange foreign pulse in the back of my mind. You're lying, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure. She stepped closer, carefully, deliberately. You felt it, didn't you? When we connected. I swallowed hard. I had felt something, a presence, a thread of consciousness intertwined with my own, something just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I didn't know where I ended and where she began. Another deep, shuddering groan echoed through the hull. The ship's metal bent, twisting as if under the weight of some unseen force. Outside, the rift was no longer just a tear in space. It was opening, and I knew with a certainty I didn't understand that if it fully breached, there would be no escape. I clenched my jaw. What do we do? Vela hesitated, just for a second, then reached for the control panel. I can collapse the rift, she said, but I can't do it alone. My stomach clenched. She looked at me, her gaze fierce. You have to let me in. The thought of it sent a fresh wave of dread through me. What little was left of my sanity screamed at me to say no, but there was no other way. I let out a slow breath. Then I lowered the rifle. Do it, I said. She didn't waste another second. This time, when her fingers touched my skin, I didn't resist. I let the connection flood back in, felt her presence fully, completely. The walls between us collapsed. I saw myself through her eyes, my fear, my doubt, my strength, and she saw me. For the first time I understood her, not just what she was, but who. And then, the world broke apart. Darkness swallowed me whole. It wasn't like losing consciousness. It wasn't like falling asleep or blacking out from a blow to the head. It was something else entirely, something deeper. I was aware of the nothingness, aware of the fact that I was floating in a void, weightless, thoughtless, existing outside of time itself. Then all at once, I was not alone. Vela's presence, wrapped around mine not as a voice, not as a body, but as a pulse, a rhythm that resonated through my being. I felt her thoughts brush against mine, her emotions bleeding into me, becoming indistinguishable from my own. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just sharing her thoughts. I was becoming her. Flashes of memories, not my own, surged through me in rapid bursts. A planet with skies of endless violet, its cities humming with light. A race that didn't speak in words but in understanding, bound together by something deeper than language. I felt the harmony, the connection, the overwhelming oneness of her people. Then, screaming, a rift tearing open above the capital, pouring shadows into the sky. The Voidborn descending not as an army, but as an absence, a force that unmade rather than destroyed. I felt the terror of an entire species in its final moments, and at the center of it all, Vela, alone, surrounded, chosen for something she never wanted, a vessel, a traitor, a survivor. The weight of it crushed me. I felt her grief as if it were my own. Her guilt. The unbearable loneliness of being the last of her kind. Carrying the knowledge that the only reason she had survived was because she had been marked by the very things that had erased her people. That was why they were hunting her. She wasn't just running from them, she was one of them. I wrenched back, gasping, and suddenly I was back in my own body, on my ship, my knees slamming into the cold metal floor. My head throbbed with the weight of everything I had just seen, just felt. Vela was kneeling in front of me, her breathing ragged, her glowing violet eyes locked onto mine. There was no deception in them now, no pretense, just raw, unfiltered truth. I didn't choose this, she whispered. I swallowed hard, still trying to separate her thoughts from mine. You're connected to them. She nodded, her expression pained. They made me something else, a bridge, a key. Her hands clenched into fists. I don't fully understand what I am, but I know what they want. I stared at her, my mind still reeling. And what's that? Her gaze flicked toward the viewport. The rift was now massive, swirling like a storm of liquid blackness, and within its depths, I saw something move, not just shapes, not just tendrils, something aware. Vela's voice was barely a whisper. They want you. My blood turned to ice. The ship trembled violently as an unseen force grasped it, pulling it toward the rift. The AI's voice was garbled now, distorted by whatever was happening outside. Gravitational collapse imminent. Hull integrity compromised. Immediate evacuation advised. I staggered to my feet, gripping the control panel for balance. The view outside warped and twisted, the laws of physics bending as if reality itself was coming undone. What do they want with me? I demanded. Vela stood, her expression unreadable. They see potential in you. I clenched my fists. That's not an answer. She hesitated, then reached for the console. The ship's systems flickered as she interacted with them in a way no human ever could, her fingers weaving through the holographic controls like threads in a tapestry. She was speaking to the ship. No, not just the ship. She was speaking to them. I felt it, like a distant whisper in the back of my mind. Something reaching, probing, listening. And then, a voice. Not hers. Not mine. Something else. Come forward. I gasped, stepping back instinctively. It wasn't sound. It wasn't language. It was direct. A thought pressed into my skull, ancient and hungry. Vela's breath hitched. She had heard it too. I turned to her, pulse hammering. We need to shut this rift. Now. She swallowed hard. If we do, they'll come after us. They won't stop. They're already coming, I snapped. So either we fight or we die. For the first time, she looked unsure, and I realized something. She had never fought them before. She had run. She had survived. But she had never stood her ground. I stepped toward her, forcing her to meet my gaze. You said you didn't choose this, I said, but you did choose to live. I gestured to the rift, to the horrors clawing at the edge of reality. Now you have another choice. Do we end this, or do we let them win? Her eyes flickered. A storm raged behind them, doubt, fear, guilt. Then, something changed. Resolve. She turned back to the console, her fingers moving faster, her entire body pulsing with energy. The ship's systems roared to life around us, the red emergency lighting shifting to a deep blue. The AI's voice stabilized. Rift destabilization sequence initiated. I exhaled sharply. Vela didn't look at me, but her voice was steady. We have one chance. If we fail, we won't get another. I nodded. Then let's make it count. Outside, the rift began to close, and the Voidborn screamed. The ship lurched as unseen forces slammed against the hull. I barely caught myself against the console, my breath ragged as the Eclipse 7 groaned like a living thing under the strain. The rift was closing, but the Voidborn weren't letting go. They were angry. I could feel them, inside my mind. The connection I had with Vela wasn't just between the two of us anymore. It had become a bridge, a two-way street, and something was clawing its way across. You do not understand. The voice wasn't sound. It wasn't even thought in the way I understood it. It was pressure, a weight behind my eyes, ancient and vast, pressing against the edges of my consciousness like a tide threatening to drown me. Vela staggered beside me, her hands gripping the console so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her glowing eyes flickered, and I could feel her struggling, trying to keep the Voidborn out, trying to keep me anchored in reality. I gritted my teeth. Shut. The rift. Vela's fingers danced across the holographic controls, weaving commands, at a speed my brain could barely track. The ship responded with a pulse of deep blue light, and the air crackled with energy as the engines strained against the pull of the rift. But the Voidborn weren't just watching anymore. They were reaching. The darkness outside twisted, unfurling like the petals of some grotesque cosmic flower, and from its center, something stepped through. It wasn't like the tendrils, the shifting masses of void I had seen before. This was something else, a form, a shape that mimicked something humanoid, tall, impossibly slender, its body composed of writhing shadows and liquid darkness. Its face was featureless save for two piercing, endless voids where eyes should have been, and it was standing inside my ship. The air turned cold. My breath came in sharp, shallow gasps, fogging in front of me as the temperature plummeted. The lights overhead flickered, then dimmed, as if something had stolen the very energy from the room. Vela sucked in a sharp breath. I turned my head, just enough to see the fear on her face. Real, raw, unfiltered. This was no ordinary Voidborn. This was something worse. The entity tilted its head, slow, deliberate, as if studying me. Then it moved, not like a person, not like a living thing. One moment it was several feet away. The next it was right in front of me. I didn't see it move. There was no motion, no transition. It was simply closer. You are not ready, it said. The words weren't spoken, but I felt them driving into my skull like spikes. My vision swam, my balance faltering. I could feel my mind unraveling, reality bending under the sheer weight of the thing standing before me. I had felt fear before. I had faced death before. But this was annihilation. I gritted my teeth, forcing my body to move, to do something. My fingers clenched around my rifle, my instincts screaming at me to shoot, to fight. But before I could, Vela stepped between us. No, she said. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't desperation. It was a command. And the entity stopped. It regarded her with those empty void eyes, its head tilting again, slower this time. Then it spoke. You were given a choice. Vela's jaw tightened. I made it. The air crackled. The entity didn't move, but I felt something shift, an unseen force rippling outward, bending reality itself. Then you will suffer. Vela's body convulsed. She let out a strangled gasp, her eyes widening in agony as something invisible gripped her, wrenching her off the ground. Energy crackled around her, her veins glowing white-hot beneath her skin. I reacted. I don't remember thinking. I don't remember deciding. 1 second, I was frozen in terror. The next, I was moving. My rifle came up. I fired. The shot burned through the air, a bolt of blue plasma aimed directly at the thing's center mass. A direct hit. It did nothing. The plasma bolt vanished the moment it touched the entity's form, swallowed whole by the abyss. Not deflected, not absorbed, just erased. The entity turned to me, and in that moment, I knew. I was about to die. I felt it reach for me, not with hands, not with tendrils, but with something deeper. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to erase me. I could feel my own existence fraying at the edges, my thoughts flickering like a dying light, my very sense of self unraveling. Then, Vela screamed. A shockwave of pure, blinding energy burst from her body, slamming into the entity, with enough force to send me sprawling backward. The ship shuddered, the walls warping and groaning under the sudden pressure. The Voidborn lurched, its form twisting, distorting. For the first time, it didn't look in control. Vela dropped to the floor, gasping, but she wasn't done. Her hands came up trembling and she tore open the air itself, a rift, a new one. But this one wasn't void. It was light. A deep, searing, impossibly bright radiance that pulsed and burned with something ancient, something powerful. And the Voidborn hissed. It recoiled, its form writhing, fracturing, splitting at the seams. It tried to move, tried to escape, but it was too late. Vela clenched her fists and the light devoured it. A scream rang through my skull. Not sound, but pure feeling. Rage, hatred, something that had never known fear, experiencing it for the first time. Then, silence. The Voidborn was gone. The ship trembled, the energy in the air fading, the rift sealing itself with a final, blinding pulse. Vela slumped forward, catching herself on one hand, her breathing ragged. I sat up slowly, my body trembling, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, I swallowed hard. What the hell was that? Vela lifted her head, her glowing eyes locking onto mine, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "The beginning." For the first time in what felt like eternity, there was silence. No more shrieking void. No more reality unraveling at the edges. Just the quiet hum of the ship, the steady pulse of the control panel lights, and the sound of our ragged breathing. Vela was still kneeling on the floor, her body trembling, her hands gripping the deck as if she might collapse. I pushed myself up, every muscle screaming in protest, and staggered toward her. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse. "Are you?" Before I could finish, she let out a soft, exhausted laugh and looked up at me with those glowing violet eyes. "I'm alive," she murmured. She didn't sound entirely convinced. I exhaled, running a hand through my sweat-damp hair. "That's more than I expected." Vela chuckled weakly, then winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. "I think I just burned through more energy than I have in my entire existence." She let out a slow breath and leaned back against the console, staring at the ceiling. But it worked. It had. The rift was gone. The Voidborn were gone. We had won. I sat down beside her, legs sprawled out, my chest rising and falling as I tried to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. "So," I said after a moment, glancing at her. "What now?" Vela tilted her head, considering. "Well," she said, "for starters, I think you should probably hate me. I blinked. What? She gestured vaguely. I did drag you into a war between dimensions, lied to you, nearly got you killed, multiple times. She wasn't wrong. But somehow sitting here in the quiet aftermath of it all, I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. And something else. Something I wasn't ready to name just yet. I huffed out a tired laugh. Yeah, you're a real pain in the ass. Vela smirked. I try. We sat there for a moment, just breathing. Then she turned to me, her expression sobering. You felt it, didn't you? She asked quietly. What they saw in you? My stomach twisted. I had. The Voidborn hadn't just been hunting me for no reason. They had recognized something. In me, potential power, something dangerous. And for a second, when they had reached for me, I had almost let them in. I swallowed hard, staring at my hands. Yeah, I admitted. I felt it. Vela was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, she said, You don't have to become what they wanted you to be. I looked at her. How do you know? Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Because I didn't. The weight in my chest loosened. Just a little. She was right. Whatever the Voidborn had seen in me, whatever they had wanted, I didn't have to let it define me. I didn't have to be afraid of myself. I could make my own choices. The ship gave a soft chime, and the AI's voice, calm, precise, cut through the air. Navigation systems restored, starfield stabilization complete, awaiting new course input. Vela sighed and hauled herself to her feet, offering me a hand. Come on, Captain, let's get the hell out of here. I stared at her hand for a second before taking it. Her grip was warm, solid. She pulled me up, and for a brief moment we stood there just inches apart, staring at each other. There were words unsaid between us, a question, a promise, something more. But we had time. I smirked. Where to? Vela's eyes gleamed mischievously. Somewhere with less interdimensional horrors, preferably. I laughed. Now that's a request I can get behind. I turned to the console, fingers gliding over the controls, setting coordinates for the nearest safe harbor. As the ship rumbled to life beneath us, the stars stretched out before us, infinite and full of possibility. We had survived, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running alone. The engines flared, the ship surged forward, and together, we disappeared into the stars,